Greetings and welcome to another edition of The Pedalshift Project. The Pedalshift Project is a series of conversations, thoughts, and experiments around the bike touring lifestyle. From tips and tricks to ideas on how to ride your ride. Let's shrink the world by bike. Show notes and more are at pedalshift.net/184 and email the show pedalshift@pedalshift.net or call the voicemail hotline 202-930-1109 and check Pedalshift out on all the socials as well. Hello, everybody, and welcome to the 184th edition of the Pedalshift Project. I'm Tim Mooney, and we are going to have an awesome show today, a little bit meta. It's all about going to be talking about documenting and sharing your bicycle tour, which sort of is what this entire show is about in some ways. So the most meta edition of the Pedalshift Project coming your way. But first, a few little bits of housekeeping, as I have been talking about. Mark those calendars, December 7th, 3 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, pedalshift.net/live. Come check out the live show. We'll be streaming it on YouTube as always. The topic is TBA. Still have to figure that one out. A lot of times it's something that's really obvious and something that comes right up at the end of time. So we'll see how that goes. But we will definitely be doing an Ask Me Anything segment. So in addition to the ask that I'm about to do in a moment here, throw some Ask Me Anything questions at me if you, especially if you're not going to be able to make it to the show, but I would love to see you there. You can, of course, ask them in real time live. pedalshift.net/live, and that is Saturday, December 7th, 3 p.m. Eastern Time. Hope to see you all there, and if you can't make it, no worries. It will be the following week's edition of the Pedalshift Project. Now's time for the second ask of you. That is, the annual Thanksgiving show drops in a few weeks from when you are hearing this, hopefully. And there's still time to get your input in on the show. What are you thankful for about bicycle touring? You can call the Pedalshift voicemail hotline. That would be amazing. I don't have a ton of those, but I would love to hear your voices a little bit more. So feel free to do that. That's 202-930-1109. I think you've got up to 2 minutes, but if you can do it in a nice tight little 30 seconds to a minute, that would be amazing too. But don't worry, I've got the editing power, so I can make that all work out just fine for you. You sound better than you think. I'm just here to tell you that. You sound amazing. But I've got a ton of great input from all over the realm, both through Facebook and through, a bunch from email and whatnot. So if you've got something that you're thankful for about bicycle touring, I would love to share your voice and throw it into the hopper. Shoot it my way, pedalshift@pedalshift.net. Email, you can do it through social, you can do it through, I'll say it again, the voicemail hotline, 202-930-1109. And that will all end up on the show, which will be, I believe, the 28th of November. So if you can get that stuff to me by the 20th of November, that would be fantastic. I'm planning on doing the show, I think, the weekend prior. So what are you thankful about? Is it fitness? Is it community? Is it adventure? Well, any of those things, all of those things? Would love to hear your stories and your takes on all of that. Next up on the show is the lab, and the lab is all about experimental stuff and things to make your bicycle tour better. One of the very common categories of questions that I get is, how do I document my trip? How do I record things in the field? I get those questions a lot, so I thought it would be a good episode topic. So here we are. Let's talk about why you might want to consider documenting your bicycle tour. A lot of folks that I know are sort of more about it from an experiential standpoint, a personal experiential standpoint, and tend not to take pictures or do anything having to do with documenting their tour. And I'm here to tell you that as somebody who goes out on a fair number of tours, I'm really, really grateful that I've got this podcast, because I forget all sorts of things having to do with past tours. I call it bike touring brain. I just lose all sense of detail. It's like it's in one ear and out, and it just doesn't stick in my brain. So I'll often go back and look at pictures or even listen to old podcasts where I talk about old tours, and I'm like, oh yeah, I totally forgot about that. It'll jog my memory really quickly, but if you asked me to talk about that tour just off the top of my head, often I won't even remember really big ticket elements of it, or what year it was, or what season it was sometimes. So I'm here to say that even if you aren't doing it for other people, Documenting it for yourself is a pretty good idea. Just for maybe, taking a peek back and reliving it further on down the road. But there's other good reasons to document. It lets your friends and family track your adventure. For many folks who get involved in bicycle touring, they've got friends or family back at home or elsewhere that are a little bit worried about your safety. We all know that this is a relatively safe type of experience to engage in. You can be injured all sorts of different ways when you're at home crossing the street. So, just because you're out on a bike out on the roads or trails doesn't necessarily mean you're more at risk. But, family, friends, they think, okay, well, this is different. And there's, I guess, a kind of a confirmation bias, maybe. Would that be what it would be called for them, so that they need to know about your safety at all times? And if you are documenting something in real time, that allows friends and family to follow along and know that you're safe and okay and in your tent or in your hotel at night at the end of a day. So that's a good reason to do it. The second thing is that it's a good safety log as well. Very often, frequently, when you go off into the wilderness, there are log books, if you're hiking, for instance, and it's saying, okay, I'm here at this point and I'm planning on going to this place. I'll be going out for 3 days. I won't have any communication, blah, 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 blah. So this is also a good way for folks to be able to track you in case something does go wrong and you're off in a ditch someplace. This will never happen, hopefully, to anybody out there, but it gives a good place for someone to start to be able to look if something does happen to go awry. So it's a safety log. The other thing is that it gives you something to look back on, like I talked about before. I can't emphasize that enough. It is such a great thing to be able to look back on past tours and go, oh yeah, that was really great. If I go back again, I'd like to do that and that, but maybe not that. So it's helpful in a planning sense as well. And maybe it's fodder for something else. Maybe it's a podcast that you want to do. Maybe it's a blog that you want to do. Maybe it's a book you want to write. Maybe. There's all sorts of good reasons why something is good to document in the moment that maybe you don't know why you're doing it. It might turn into something else down the line. So documenting your tour is, I think, a really good idea. There are a whole host of mechanisms to do it. And I'm just going to go through, this is a brain dump, man. I'm just going to go through all the different ways that I've run into, that I've done, that I've seen other people do, and just my thoughts on it. The first is sort of the easiest, and that's the written word. And I'll talk about it in the sense of a blog, but I think this would also be applicable for those of you who are thinking about writing a memoir or writing a book or a short story about your tour. The written word. It's old school. It's the original way. It's the OG way of getting your point of view across. It's especially good if you're a writer more than a talker. And through the years, for me personally, I learned that I'm a much better spoken word advocate than I am a written advocate, even though I do a lot of writing in my day job and whatnot. I think I enjoy the spoken word a little bit more. There's a little more freedom. It's a little bit more long form. But if you are more of a writer, this is the place to go. It's cheap. It's easy. It's often free. It's something that you can do on a little pad and paper. It can be something that you can do in an electronic device. There's all sorts of different ways that you can do it. And the great part is there's tons of platforms that are out there that are free that allow you to do this. Some that are really targeted in bike touring specific areas like Cycleblaze, Crazy Guy on a Bike, things like that. Or you can go out and do your own website, your own blog. You can brand it yourself. There's tons of examples out there. I will not go into all of them. But I think that the written word is a good way to go about doing it. The easiest way to do it is sort of diary style, saying, on this day I did this, on that day I did that. Here's what my plans are. Here's what my pack list is. You can write it in the first person narrative, and it's great. It's tried and true. It's been done a lot, and I think that there's a lot of appetite for it. I know that people who are interested in bicycle touring love to read about bicycle touring, and if you do it in a good illustrative way, I think that the written word can be an excellent way of getting your point of view across. And it also allows you to delve into other things like characters and the people that you meet, and maybe getting into thematic issues. If you really are more of an accomplished writer, and this is more than just a journal or a diary entry, you can really kind of get into things. So, you may be wanting to write in a prose style, like, in written sentences and whatnot. Or maybe you're just going to jot these things down in the sense of notes for use later when you're going to go back and reflect on your trip, and then maybe write in the past tense using your notes as a guideline. Lots of different ways to do it, and I think that you just want to stick with what you're interested in and go for it. There are a lot of different, if you're wanting to get into writing and you haven't done a lot of it before, there are a ton of really great books out there that I would recommend. The book that I think that is the best resource for a lot of different authors that I know, one of which I live with, and screenwriters that I respect, is The Artist's Way by Julia Cameron. And this is a book that real writers often say is the source of why they're a good writer or how they learn to be a good writer. And one of the topics that she talks about doing is just getting used to writing every day. It's morning pages. You get up in the morning and you write, I think it's like either 2 or 4 pages longhand, written handwriting, just writing what's on your brain that morning. It doesn't have to be structured. It doesn't have to be a particular topic. But what it does is it gets you used to writing more. And that would be something that I would recommend if you're getting involved in a project where you want to write about your bicycle tour. Start doing this kind of stuff before you go out on a bike. And I think you'll be really pleasantly surprised about what turns out in the end. But I'll have a link in the show notes to Julia Cameron's book. It's really, really inspired a lot of people. And it's been around for, I think, 25, 30 years. It's a really good book if you're an aspiring writer. And even if you're not an aspiring writer, but you want to document stuff through writing, I'd recommend that book because I think it can be really helpful for you. And it certainly has inspired authors that I know. The next couple of areas that I want to talk about have to do with using social media as your documenting source. And when I'm talking about social media, it's kind of a mix of the photography and the written word. I'll get into video and audio in a little bit here. Obviously, video and audio can be used on these platforms as well, but I think that they're good as sort of standalone topics for this discussion. The first social media outlet, I guess I'll say, or platform that I think you should consider potentially using is Facebook. It is not because I dig Facebook. In fact, I am this close to getting out of Facebook for a whole bunch of reasons that you probably read about in the news. But I think that it is a really powerful platform because it has such a broad reach and lots and lots and lots, literally billions of people are on it. And I think that if you want exposure, if you want to get it out there, and even if you want to narrowcast it just to your friends and family who are on Facebook, you can do that too. You can narrow the reach to just a private group if you'd like, and post photos and do the same things that I was talking about in the blog area, in the written word area, in the journaling way. It's a really nice, good, powerful platform for all of that. I think that there are tons of good examples of folks who use Facebook really, really well. One guy who listens to the show, Preston Page Piper, the Triple P guy that I talk about every once in a while, he does a really nice job. A lot of the times, Preston will just do a really cool brain dump and a video of what's going on. He just recently finished up a tour of basically the Gap and the C&O, and I thought it was a really good way of documenting his trip, and he did it mostly on his page on Facebook, but he also cross-posted on a whole bunch of other groups that are out there as well. So you can do that. You can also get more exposure for the type of work that you want to do with it and share your experiences with other people. Facebook's pretty powerful that way. It's got its problems, I'm here to tell you. And I find that I reach a lot of people on it, but I don't necessarily always like the interactions that always go on there. It's become the type of platform, like another one I'm going to talk about in a minute, that you can get some negativity or just some like weird, I don't know, snarkiness that is not like kind of positive, fun, little ribbing snarkiness, like just kind of jackassery snarkiness that'll happen there. So you expose yourself to a little bit of that too, unless you make it into a private group and only expose it to friends and family that you are interested in sharing with. But Facebook is another place that you can consider doing. Social media area that I'm actually much more active in, not because it's much better, but I don't know. I think I just like the constraints of it. And that's Twitter. You know, having X number of characters, I think it's 140. I think 140 characters. You know, I think that that's kind of a nice way to limit your creativity a little bit. And sometimes when you have limitations on how you can express yourself, you are more creative in that. And I think I find that to be true with Twitter. It's great for immediate hits and can also include location pings. I think Facebook can do that as well, but I know that Twitter does that. And that can be helpful for folks who are tracking you as you're going along, for good and for bad. I mean, you know, going back to the safety stuff and the family tracking you and all that other kind of stuff, it can be really helpful with that because you can send up a GPS ping with any tweets that you put out. It's also a lot lower impact on your data plan. Now, of course, I'm talking about doing this on your mobile phone rather than on your computer. Of course, if you're going to lug a computer along, you can do that too. I think that this is probably the best way for doing it on the light side of things. Most of us are going to be carrying some kind of a phone with us. Twitter actually works pretty good on the phone. It's a good way to do what I'd like to call maybe micro journaling. Maybe that's a term that's been used before, but you know, it's a great way to sort of document things, maybe not at the end of the day, like a lot of longer form journals will do, but in quick little hits as you're going along. So it's a more of a real time type of situation of writing. You can also do things with audio and video as well through Twitter and with Facebook, but this is a little more constrained and a little more bite-sized. So if that's the way that you think, if that's the way that you want to approach things, I think Twitter's a good way to go about doing it. If you don't really feel drawn to long-form anything, written, audio, video, whatever, Twitter by its very nature is a one-thought type of exercise. So it's sort of like, snap, here's a picture of the dam number 5 on the C&O. It's really beautiful and weird to see, you know, the river this big and wild and being constrained by this dam. And oh, here's my bike and here I am. Here's a selfie. You know, that's kind of a cool way to document that particular experience on the C&O for just an example. But, you know, all sorts of things. Maybe you run into something weird. Maybe you run into a bit of wildlife that you weren't expecting. You know, it's a nice way to sort of put it out there. And Twitter's a good way to do that. Next one is, I think, my favorite way of doing it, in part because it can be inclusive of the other platforms as well, and that's Instagram. When I am writing, I tend not to like to take a lot of time to document things in the moment in a written or audio way. There are times when I do. You've heard examples of it on the show. But I tend to like to do things with more visual hits. And they also don't necessarily need to be in that very moment, although sometimes they are. And that's Instagram. These days, this is my micro journaling platform of choice. It creates a visual map that you can go back to and kind of re-experience your tour in, well, a visual way. And it can do video as well. It allows for some written material, and it's not constrained by the 140 characters that Twitter has. So you can kind of get into a little more detail if you'd like to maybe tell a story that goes along with a picture like that. But the thing that I like most about using Instagram is it's sort of baked into the cake that you can auto post to other platforms as well. It's especially good for Facebook because, frankly, Facebook owns Instagram. So that's really good, and it will post and, you know, do all sorts of good things. But you can also set it up to do some good stuff with Twitter as well. Now, Twitter, if you just use the built-in feature, it doesn't actually post the photo that you take in line. It posts just a link. There's a good service, and here's a little pro tip here called If This Then That. And I think it's just if.com or if.net or if.something. But just Google If This Then That. And it's a service, a free web service, that one of the little recipes that they've got allows you to have it so that every time you post an Instagram on your feed, it will retweet that with the photo in line on your Twitter account as well. So between that plus an auto post to Facebook, when I'm on tour, that's why you get to see every picture. Whether or not you follow me on Instagram, I'm using Instagram as my source material, and then it gets out to all of these other platforms as well. So I do one thing and it goes out on 3 platforms. And that's really, really, really nice. There are inevitably family members and friends who are like, oh, I'm not on Facebook, or oh, I don't understand Twitter, or I'm just not on Instagram. This way you can handle all of the folks who are maybe just single platform users. And I just think it's a lot better. Instagram, I just also as a community, I think is a lot more chill. I tend not to see as much kind of jackassery on Instagram. And that's kind of nice. I don't know if that's always going to be the case. I'm sure it's not. I'm sure there's lots of examples of jackassery on Instagram. But at least in my review of things in the bike touring realm, it tends to be the most chill. And I kind of appreciate that. So that's Instagram. Now let's talk a little bit more about audio. Obviously, I have a thing or two to say about audio and bicycle touring. I get a ton of questions about how I get the sound that I get when I'm out in the field. And the answer is probably going to surprise you. Yes, you can get a professional recorder. And I've actually considered doing that. There are great ones out there. The Zoom H6 is probably the one that would be the one that I'd recommend for folks who are looking for the most flexibility. It's a really good recorder. You can do XLR microphones. You can record straight off of it. It's really professional. It's quite good sound. I know a lot of people that use it professionally for real deal audio. But guess what? You really don't need it. You really don't need it. I don't. I've never owned an H6. I think I owned one of the H1s or one of the really, really kind of janky ones a million years ago. And it was fine. The audio was fine, but the microphone wasn't all that great. Where I get my good sound out in the field, on the trails and on the roads is frankly right from my iPhone. Now, I'm not going to make this a big, long advertisement for Apple products, but I record and edit and work exclusively in Apple stuff just because I've liked how it's worked. I've worked on them for all the years of my life. It's just what I'm used to. It doesn't mean that you can't do this on an Android phone or on Windows or whatever. It's just not what my experience is. I'm sure there's lots of people who do it, but I'll tell you how I do it. So in the field, I'm now working off of one of the new iPhone 11s. And it's excellent. The photography that I get off of it just gets better and better every single iteration, which is fantastic. I really like that. The microphone on board for iPhones has been good for a very long time. The software that's built into the operating system that defeats ambient noise that is kind of is really quite good, and it is kind of set. You don't even have any settings. It just does it sort of automatically, which is kind of nice. Now, if you're more of a professional, you really want to be able to do the settings yourself. I get that. But for me, out in the field, when I'm riding and, recording is kind of a secondary act, it's really nice that it's just, hey, I hit record and it captures things in a really nice way. It's built to capture your voice and to have good exterior sounds, so you get that nice soundscape. But it focuses on my voice, which is sort of what we're all here for when it comes to recording a podcast about your ride. Now, I don't necessarily always use the internal mic, although I think it's quite good. I know folks in public radio use their iPhones for that really nice rich sound that you hear on public radio in interviews, whether it's, kind of all things considered style shows that are done at the local level. They'll use their iPhone for that, which is pretty remarkable. And that's where I got the idea from to do it. And it's always been quite good for me. One thing that I'll say also is those white earbuds that come with your iPhone, they're kind of sneaky good. They've got really nice onboard microphones in them. So a great deal of what you're hearing when I'm doing a show where you can tell that I'm riding while I'm talking, I'm using just those stock white iPhone earbuds. And they're quite good. Now, in the episode that I did recently, last week's episode, what I was finding is that they do degrade over time. And I had a set of old school ones with the normal headphone jack ones that I'd use a dongle to go into my former phone. I had an iPhone 8 for a couple of years, and it was starting to get to a point where I was hearing sound artifacts, like scratching almost. You might have even picked it up on a few of the episodes. And so, now that I've moved on to a new one, I've got a new set of earbuds that are much better. They're brand new. The other ones just got so beat up over time. So eventually, yeah, they're not going to sound as good. So you may find that you need to replace things over time. But sneaky good microphones, really good ones. And they're up by your mouth. I can't tell you how important it is to have a microphone up by where you're talking and not like from shotgun style from far away. If you can avoid it, you always have a better sound when you're up close to your mic. So those are pretty good. They're pretty good, I'm here to tell you. And that's kind of what I use most of the time. In terms of apps for recording yourself, your voice, the voice memo app in the iPhone, perfectly good. Perfectly good. Now it records it in Apple's proprietary format, but you can always change it. You can always convert it down the line. It is a compressed format, but, frankly, that's fine for most uses. If you want to record in an uncompressed format, you can do that. There's other apps that are out there. I've got a few. One's called Sound Recorder. I've got another one that I've used for the folks who are members of the Pedalshift Society. It actually records and puts the audio in an MP3. It records it in a compressed format, but it automatically uploads it to Dropbox, and I've got some magical stuff going on in the background that turns that into a podcast. So I can record, put something up immediately into the cloud, and it immediately becomes a podcast within maybe 10 to 15 minutes and ends up in your feeds. So yeah, you can do cool stuff like that if you want to spend the data on your phone and get the audio up into the cloud, and then it automatically gets converted into a feed. You can Google and figure that all out yourself, but it's kind of cool. It's kind of cool what you can do when you're out there. Or if this is for you or for your family, maybe you just text it out to them, or maybe you just hold it on your phone and when you get home, you do something with it. There's all sorts of different ways that you can do it. I mentioned that you want to record in with a microphone that's as close to your mouth as you possibly can. Of course, you want to be mindful of the fact that if you get too close to it, you could send the levels too high if you talk too loud. Also, wind you want to be mindful of as well. So be mindful of all these things. Listen to the recordings that you make and practice a lot. You'll know what ends up working out sooner rather than later. I would recommend that you record in the highest fidelity that you possibly can. So if you've got room on your phone to record it in an uncompressed format, you're just saving yourself down the line. The less compressed it is, the more things you can do with it later if you want. But if you're like, dude, I don't know anything about audio editing, I don't know anything about microphones or whatever, just use the onboard Apple voice memo app or whatever's on Android or whatever you want to use. If all this is, hey, I just want to record myself and we'll figure it out later, use what's simple. Use the simplest stuff available. If you are looking to maybe edit it, record in the highest fidelity in an uncompressed state, and that's the best bet as well. Record a lot. Edit at home. That is also something else that I would recommend because, you only get one shot at this. And yeah, I suppose you could retell certain elements of the story later, when you're sitting at home. But you know what? It's always good to have more. I very rarely come home from a trip and say, geez, I wish I recorded less audio. I don't ever really feel that way. I will say that sometimes I've found that I'm doing more recording and less enjoying of my tour. So you want to find that good balance too, enjoy the stuff, document it, but focus on yourself having fun and what's the main purpose for you being out there. Sometimes the main purpose of me being out there is actually to record. So that's cool. It's for you, the gentle listener. Okay, so that's a lot on audio. What do I should say one thing. I don't have it in the show notes, but I should mention because I'm staring at it right now. I have used for the better part of nearly, we're rounding the corner to 20 years that I've been working in audio, but I think it's more like 18. Audacity, it's a free multi-platform piece of software. It is open source. It's free. It works everywhere. I think it's excellent. There are folks that swear by things like Adobe Audition or, all sorts of different types of more pro-level audio editing. GarageBand is free on Apple as well. use what you want. Audacity, I've gotten to the point where, the learning curve is so flat right now. I've used it for so long. I've considered going to other platforms, but Audacity does everything I need. And frankly, it's pretty good and it's free. And I'm just used to the interface. And if I move to anything else, I'd have to relearn things that I do automagically now in Audacity. So that's the one that I use. And that's the one that I would recommend for folks who are starting out as well. It's a little, there's a learning curve, but you know what? There's a learning curve for everything. So Audacity, that would be my recommendation, but knowing there's a lot more out there as well. All right, that's it for audio. Video. It's not my priority. Last year, I think I spent a lot more time on video, and I'm really glad I did. I created some stuff that, frankly, I'm really proud of, and I really enjoy looking back on, but it takes so much time. So much more time than you think to edit and to piece together, and it's just a lot. And that's why I haven't done a lot of it in the last 9 months or so, just because I can create some really fun, interesting stuff. But my priority is not to have a YouTube channel where, that's where, people are flocking to for looks. Most of my storytelling, most of my stuff is audio, and that's why it's here on the podcast. I like to do video, and I certainly will shoot video, and I certainly will put more video up on YouTube. But it's a very time consuming thing, and that's why I tip my hat to the folks out there in the bicycle touring space that do video, because I know how much time it takes and how hard you have to work to get to a quality level that is good. So, Pathless Pedal, Darren Alf, a bicycle touring pro, those guys are, they're doing a lot of work to make that stuff look good and sound good for you. So, top tip of the hat to those folks. I think that there's a variety of different ways that you can do it, and you've seen on all sorts of different video platforms people doing it. You could do it vlog style. There's a guy that he's an Australian guy, Cody something or other. I'll put a link in the show notes. I've followed his stuff. Another guy that is, I think he's about ready to do some more riding. He's Doug Conklin, vlog style, where they record, it looks like every day, or if not every day, almost every day, and just kind of telling the stories of how things are going, and they'll just do quick little hits and just piece these things together. And it tells a really interesting narrative story. It's video journaling. It's a vlog. It's a video log. And I think it's a really interesting way of doing it. And then there's sort of the more documentary style, which, I think is the much more produced style that I was doing for a while, and it just takes a lot more time, which isn't to say that the vlogger style doesn't take time. It certainly takes a ton of time to do, but I think that if you're doing bigger ticket productions, that's where you're going to be shooting a lot, and you're going to be doing much more of it in post when you get home. Vlogging style, you can do from the road, and I think that that's a really cool and interesting way of doing it. I enjoy consuming it. I haven't gotten to the point where I enjoy making it as much, and I think that you'll find that too when it comes to your storytelling and your documenting of your tour. You gravitate to what you enjoy making, maybe more than what you enjoy consuming, and video for me is exactly one of those things. In terms of the tips that I would give for some of the work that I have done, you want to record in the highest quality that you can. I personally actually started getting, for the last couple of iPhones, much larger capacity storage in my phones because I was shooting in 1080p and now in 4K video. Just because, hey, if you record in the highest quality that you can, it shows much better in the final product. It's really nice to shoot in 4K video, but it is enormous. Some of the videos that you'll do when you're doing an hour-long video in 4K, I think it can be 10 gigs or more, which is just enormous. And if you started off in computers like when I did, when 64 kilobytes was sort of like, oh, wow, that's crazy. And now we're talking about 10 gigabytes for just a file, not an operating system, but a file. It's kind of mind-blowing. I'm also very old, for all of you kind of folks who are much younger than me listening. If you're a drone pilot, dude, another tip of the cap, that's something that I've often been really interested and intrigued in getting into. I just don't have the time, or I don't know. Maybe I don't have the skill either. Probably don't have the skill. But something that I'd want to potentially get into. I think that you get some amazing freaking shots of all sorts of great things. And certainly in the bicycle touring context, man, drone shots are great. One thing that I'll say, though, is I feel like sometimes it's a little overused. I don't know about anybody else. Maybe this is my hot take of the show here, but I think sometimes people over-rely on drone shot footage for their stuff, and they're not telling the stories on the ground, and they just love the big panoramic cinematic stuff that they can show of them on a bike, or in van life or anywhere. I'm not just talking about bicycle touring, but I think used sparingly, it's awesome to tell your story. Used too much, it's just like, okay, cool, we got the big boom shot, we got the big helicopter shot, cool. It just doesn't. It's a bit of a crutch sometimes it's used. And I think that when you're wanting to tell maybe a smaller story, the big cinematic stuff kind of gets in the way of stuff. That's just maybe my hot take. So be mindful, though, if you're a drone pilot, there are flight restrictions in a lot of places. You are technically not allowed to use a drone in national parks, for instance. And that's one of the big reasons why I haven't gotten into the drone footage. I would love to do some drone stuff on the CNO, for instance, but it's just not allowed. It's a National Historic Park and you can't do it. So I suppose I could fly it outside of the boundaries. It's actually a really skinny national park. I could fly it from outside the boundaries, but technically I'd be taking it off and landing it from within the boundaries of the national park. And that's just illegal. And I'm not into federal crimes, just between you and me. I'm not into breaking federal law. Maybe it's the lawyer in me, but yeah. Anyways, on that weird note, that's my thoughts on video. So here we are. I've just gone through writing and blogging, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, social media, audio, video. That's been a big brain dump of all of the different ways of getting your point of view across. Now I want to talk a little bit about content. I've talked about it here and there a little bit, but let's talk about the content of documenting your bike tour. I think focusing on people and the experience is a much better way to go. For me, when I do the podcast, I would love to be able to do more interviews of people, but I tend to find that I'm more solitary of a rider. And that's why when I document my rides for the podcast, you're hearing my voice mostly. In fact, almost exclusively. I've had these grand notions of, recording folks in camp that I meet and stuff like that. But frankly, at the end of the day, pulling out my recorder and saying, hey, everybody, want to be on a podcast? Just is sort of... I envision it being a bit of a buzzkill. One of these days I'll do it and have more good stuff. I did it, I remember, years ago for the Pacific Coast ride, and I thought it turned out really, really well. It was kind of fun and cool, but I knew these people. We had been riding for days together, weeks even, and it was something that, all right, this makes sense, we'll do it, and it turned out good. But people and experience is much more interesting than, just kind of a log of what how your bike handled or an equipment blog. But maybe that works for you. Maybe you're more interested in testing out your gear and this is a gear blog or a gear experience thing. You do you, but just in terms of storytelling, people and experience, I think, is always much better and always much more interesting for me to look back upon, to recall the people that I met and the stories that they told. I think that's always good. Know that, especially if you've never gone on a bike tour before, I'm here to tell you that bike touring alters your perception of things. You may be surprised at what you document in the moment. I have found that after the second or third day, my outlook on things alters everything. I've talked about bike touring brain before. But I think that you find yourself transitioning back into everyday life. And when you're talking with people who are moving at the same pace as you, they're going 50, 60 miles in a day at, between 10 and 12 miles per hour. You have much more to talk with them about than you do with people who are zooming by you and doing that same distance in an hour or less. So the stories you tell, the conversations that you have, they're all different. And I think that that's cool and awesome. And it's something that is reflected in what you end up documenting. So yeah, that's kind of a cool element to all of this. So I said before, you never come back, or I never come back from a tour and say, gee, I wish I hadn't recorded so much. But that goes in direct contrast to what I'm about to suggest here. Don't over document your trip. What do I mean by that? If the trip becomes more about documentation than the ride, you might regret it later, because you might be missing literally the forest for the trees. Now, my caveat, my sort of flip-sided, my devil's advocate on that. If your primary reason is to go out there and make a documentary of your trip and then go on tour to document it, well, your primary reason is to do that. Annalisa and Eric from Miles of Portraits, they are going out there to meet people and document. That is what they're doing. So really, their documentation is the first reason why they're going out there. Now, it's kind of a cool way. It goes back to my first point. They're focusing on the people that they meet. So I think it all rolls together. But, they're not necessarily going out there to, jam out 60 miles a day. In fact, they probably do. In fact, they've said it on the show. They do a lot less than that. But, unless you're doing a trip like theirs is, where it's very much about the documentation, I recommend living the experience and letting the documentation be a secondary or even a tertiary point of view for things, because you're there to enjoy the ride. You're there to like it, and you're there to have fun with it. And I think that the documentation for most of you is probably best to be an and also kind of thing, because then you'll have all of these great things to look at, but really you didn't live the experience for that documentation. I hope that all makes sense. But that's you're there to do the experience first and then the documentation second for the majority of you, unless it's not, in which case disregard everything I said for the last 2 minutes or so. Last but not least in the content, know your audience. What are they interested in? Now, your audience may be just you. This may be just documenting for yourself in a journal for you to look back and read on. You have absolutely no interest whatsoever in sharing it with anybody else. And so all the talk that I did on social media, on audio and video that you aren't planning on sharing, disregard all of that. But if you are planning on sharing it, know who's going to be consuming it. If it's just friends and family, well, maybe then you're going to be talking about things in a different way. You're not going to talk about the gnarly spill you almost took. If they're following along because it's a safety thing, maybe you're going to save that for your own memories, or, maybe it's something that you're doing for a broader thing. Maybe you're doing a ride to raise money for awareness for a cause. I've had a whole bunch of people on the show for that kind of stuff, and you're sharing it with those folks. That's who your audience is, what you're bringing them along for. Know who you're speaking to. Know who is watching your video. Know who's following your Twitter feed and your Instagram feed, or however you're documenting it, and speak to them directly. I think that you'll find that the way you communicate is much more powerful when you've got them in mind when you're doing the communication. I literally do that before every show. I think about the type of listeners that I've got, and I think that that's really, really helpful. I want to wrap up the discussion here by talking about the expectations to have afterwards. And this is mostly for people that are looking to get some exposure with your journal, with your documentation, whether it's a video or audio or a written word, a blog, a vlog, whatever it is. The thing that I would say is have proper expectations as to how much exposure you're going to be able to get off of it. Good content, I think, finds an audience. I don't think that all good content finds an audience very quickly. There are 1,000,001 things that are out there to get your attention for reading and watching and listening. And there's just so much stuff. That's why I'm so grateful that you all listened to this dopey little podcast about bicycle touring. Trust me, I'm super grateful for it. But it's also something that didn't happen overnight. I think that the first episode of the Pedalshift Project might have had a couple of dozen downloads, and probably mostly from people that I knew. So it starts off slowly, and the exposure that you get grows over time if you are creating something that people are interested in seeing. There are so many journals out there. All you have to do is go on Cycle Blaze or Crazy Guy on a Bike and see there are thousands, tens of thousands, perhaps more of journals, probably about the route that you're cycling as well. And that's really great. I appreciate it. But I'm certainly not going to be able to read every single one. And likewise, not everybody's going to be able to read your journal. So if you're looking to get exposure for however you're doing it, be patient, because it's just not going to come all at once, especially if it's a one-shot kind of a thing. I do this show on a weekly basis, and, it's a ton of work to do that. But it also is one of the reasons why, it allows for people to kind of slowly come on board, and then maybe they listen to back episodes, or maybe they don't. Maybe they drop out. Maybe they're like, I'm cool to dip in and dip out, and that's cool by me as well. I don't get into this for any kind of growth model or something like that, although I really truly enjoy doing it, and I love having people listen. It's mostly just sort of I do this because I love it, and the listenership sort of follows, but after a lot of time and a lot of work. So if your expectations are really high, that it's like, I shot the best video ever and I'm going to get 1 million views on YouTube because this is an amazing video. It may come, it may happen. You might catch that viral wave, but it's really not very likely unless something kind of remarkable happens. And generally speaking, that's sort of out of your control. If you do want exposure to your work, your writing, your audio, your video, it's going to take years probably of sustained effort. These days, it's very rare that somebody kind of breaks in out of nowhere and, just does a bang up job and gets tons of eyeballs. It usually requires a whole host of really awesome things to happen in the interim. But for the rest of us, it just takes kind of good, consistent work. And that would be something that I would recommend to you. If that is something that you are after, if you are after, hey, I want to get into this whole bicycle touring thing, and I want to talk about it, or I want to document it, and I want to put it out there, having good expectations about what's in the realm of possible, probably a good idea. Ultimately, the journal, the documentation, what you're creating, it is a gift for you down the road to look back to. And that's kind of what I started all of this off on. I think that whenever you're looking at documenting your trip, whether it's for you, for friends and family, or for sort of the general public, ultimately, the person that is going to be most benefited by it is you, because you're going to have this great memory that you're able to encapsulate, whether it's just in the written word, or it's in audio, or it's in video, or it's in pictures, or however you end up doing it. Maybe, Russ from Pathless Pedal, he does amazing watercolors, beautiful stuff. That's another way you can document some artistic way of doing it. That's a gift for you down the road to remember that sunset, or to remember those people that you met. That's why I think documenting a trip is so important. And even if you do it just a little bit, you're going to have it for yourself later on down the road. And I hope that all of this stuff that I talked about over the last, I'm just looking at how long I've been talking here. There's a lot to talk about when it comes to documenting your trip. But, it all ends up being a really gratifying thing to have at the end of the day. So I hope that this is helpful for you in thinking about how you are going to document your next bicycle tour. And as always, we like to close out the show with a special shout out to the Pedalshift Society. Because of support from listeners like you, Pedalshift is a weekly bicycle touring podcast with a global community, expanding into live shows and covering new tours like this year's DC to Cincinnati bike tour. If you like what you hear, you can support the show for $5, $2, or even $1 a month. And there's one-shot and annual options if you're not into the small monthly thing. Check it all out at pedalshift.net/society. On to the society. Kimberly Wilson, Caleb Jenkinson, Cameron Lien, Andrew MacGregor, Michael Hart, Keith Nagel, Brock Dittus, Thomas Skadow, Marco Lowe, Terrance Manson, Harry Telgadas, Chris Barron, Mark Van Raam, Brad Hipwell, Stuart Buchan, Mr. T, Roxy Arning, Nathan Pulton, Stephen Dickerson, Vince LoGreco, Paul Culbertson, Scott Culbertson, Cody Floerchinger, Tom Benenati, Greg Braithwaite, Sandy Pizzio, Jeff Muster, Seth Pollock, Joseph Quinn, Drew Porter, Byron Patterson, Joachim Robert, Ray Jackson, Jeff Fry, Kenny Mikey, Lisa Hart, John Denkler, Steve Hankel, Miguel Quinones, Alejandro Avilés-Reyes, Keith Spangler, Greg Towner, Dan Gebhardt, Jody Zeranin, Lucas Barwick, Michael Baker, Brian Bechtold, Reinhard Biggle, Greg Middlemas, Connie Moore, William Gothman, Brian Benton, Joan Churchill, Mike Bender, Rick Weinberg, Billy Crafton, Gary Matushak, Greg Latois Lopez, James Sloan, Jonathan Dillard, John Funk, Tom Bilch, Ronald Paroli, Dave Roll, Brian Hafner, Misha LeBlanc, Ari Messenger, David Grotke, and new to the Society, Todd Grosbeck, Wally Estrella, Sue Reinhardt, and John Lecco, and thanks to all past and anonymous contributors for helping make this show happen.
Thank you for joining. You can find Pedalshift at pedalshift.net for more great bicycle touring content. You can hear the Pedalshift project through Apple Podcasts or your favorite podcast app. Opening music courtesy of Jason Kent off his self-titled album. The track is called America. Check out his band Sunfield's latest release, Mono Mono, wherever cool music is available.